3 weeks had passed since Nari first entered the Galactic Court, and she had become very good at pretending to be Velnara, the alien trader. Her fake identity was working perfectly because traders needed to go everywhere on the station to do their business. They had to check shipping schedules and look at price lists and talk to officials about cargo permits. Nobody questioned why she was always moving around and asking questions. Her big breakthrough came during what seemed like a normal business meeting with a Korathi merchant named Velthek. The alien had 4 arms that moved in strange patterns when he talked, and his skin kept changing colors from blue to purple to green. Nari was trying to negotiate a deal for rare metal shipments when she noticed something on his personal data pad that made her heart almost stop beating. There were symbols on his screen that looked exactly like ancient writing from Earth symbols that she remembered from old history books about civilizations that had disappeared thousands of years ago. How could an alien trader have documents with Earth symbols on them when humans had only been in space for a few decades? After the meeting ended, Nari went back to her quarters and used her trader access codes to get into the station's computer network. What she found there destroyed everything she thought she knew about human history. The secret files showed that humanity hadn't discovered space travel on their own. They had been guided and manipulated and carefully controlled by the Galactic Court for over 200 years. The records were clear and terrifying. Earth had been marked as a controlled development zone since the 1800s. Every major breakthrough that humans had made, from electricity to nuclear power to rocket ships, had been subtly influenced by alien technology planted on Earth. Humans weren't newcomers to the galaxy at all. They were an experiment that had been going on for centuries. The aliens had been watching Earth and controlling human development like scientists studying rats in a laboratory. They had agents on Earth who made sure that humans discovered exactly what the aliens wanted them to discover. When they wanted them to discover it, everything that humans thought they had invented themselves had actually been given to them by their alien masters. But the most shocking discovery was still waiting for her. Deep in the most secret files, Nari found references to something called the human anomaly. The documents were written in code, but she managed to translate enough to understand what they meant. The aliens were talking about unexpected changes in human evolution that were scaring them. Words like quantum consciousness and reality manipulation potential appeared over and over again, next to warnings about containment protocols and termination procedures. The aliens had discovered that humans were developing some kind of special ability that made them dangerous, something that could threaten the carefully ordered civilization that the Galactic Court had built. Nari read file after file with growing horror. The aliens hadn't just been watching humanity, they had been actively working to suppress whatever this special ability was. They had been putting things in Earth's environment to keep humans from developing their full potential. Chemicals in the air and water, special frequencies in radio broadcasts, even certain types of architecture and city planning were designed to keep humans weak and manageable. The suppression had been working for decades, but now it was starting to fail. The files showed increasing reports of anomalous events around human populations. People were surviving accidents that should have killed them. Scientists were making breakthrough discoveries through sudden flashes of inspiration. Artists were creating works that seemed to affect reality itself. The aliens called these incidents manifestations of quantum consciousness, and they were getting more frequent every year. Their scientists estimated that within the next 50 years, the suppression system would completely break down and humans would begin showing their true abilities, whatever those abilities were. The aliens were terrified of them. That was when Nari found the real reason for the cleansing protocol. It wasn't just about eliminating a troublesome species. It was about destroying humanity before they could develop into something that might challenge the Galactic Court's control over the galaxy. The aliens had decided that it was better to commit genocide than to risk losing their power. The timeline was even worse than she had feared. The cleansing protocol was scheduled to begin in less than 4 months. Not 6 solar flares would be artificially triggered to destroy Earth's electronics. Asteroids would be guided into collision courses with major population centers. Engineered diseases would be released to kill anyone who survived the initial attacks. Nari spent hours copying every file she could find onto her hidden storage devices. She was no longer just gathering intelligence. She was documenting the greatest crime in galactic history, the systematic manipulation and planned extermination of an entire species. And she was the only person who knew the truth. The worst part was learning how long it had been going on generation after generation of humans had lived and died, never knowing that their entire civilization was being controlled by alien puppet masters. Every war, every discovery, every cultural change had been guided by beings who saw humans as nothing more than interesting lab animals. But there was something else in the files that gave Nari hope. The aliens were afraid of humans for a reason. This quantum consciousness ability, whatever it was, must be incredibly powerful if it scared beings who controlled most of the galaxy. Maybe humanity wasn't as helpless as everyone thought. Maybe they had the power to fight back if they knew what was coming. Finished copying the files and began planning her next move. She needed to get into the central archive where the most secret information was kept. She needed to find out exactly what this quantum consciousness was and how humans could use it to defend themselves. The aliens had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated the species they were trying to control. As she prepared for the most dangerous part of her mission, Nari felt something changing inside her. The stress and fear and anger were awakening something that had been sleeping in her mind. She could feel it growing stronger every day, like a fire that was just beginning to burn, and she had a feeling that the aliens had good reason to be afraid of what humans might become. Linari stood in front of the mirror inside her small ship and touched her fake blue skin one more time. The biomask felt cold and strange against her real face, but it looked exactly like the Villani aliens. She had practiced wearing it for months, until it felt almost natural. The synthetic flesh moved with her expressions and even felt warm to the touch, just like real alien skin. Her hands were shaking as she checked the voice modifier in her throat. The tiny machine would change how she sounded when she spoke, making her voice have the musical quality that all Villani used when they talked. It had taken her 3 long years to learn how to use it properly. 3 years of painful operations and endless training and studying dozens of alien languages until she could think and act like them. Nari was about to become the first human ever to enter the Galactic Court, the most secret and powerful place in the entire galaxy. Every important alien leader from across the stars met there to make decisions that affected billions of lives on thousands of different worlds. And none of them had any idea that a human was about to walk right into their most protected building. Disguised as one of them, she took a deep breath and looked at herself one last time in the mirror. The woman looking back at her had blue skin and silver eyes and long, white hair that moved like it was underwater. She looked nothing like the human woman who had left Earth 3 years ago. She looked like Velnara, a small trader who sold rare metals between different star systems. The door of her ship opened and Nari stepped out onto the docking bay of the orbital station. The first thing that hit her was the size of everything around her. The station was huge beyond anything she had ever imagined. It was like a metal city floating in the darkness of space, with towers that stretched up toward the stars and bridges made of pure energy connecting different sections. The whole thing was bigger than most planets. Walking through the main entrance, Nari felt overwhelmed by how alien everything was. The walls were covered in symbols that seemed to move and shift when she looked at them. The air smelled like metal and electricity and something sweet that made her head feel dizzy. Sounds echoed from every direction in languages she had never heard before. Even with all her training, aliens were everywhere, and each one was more strange and wonderful than the last. The Korathi walked on 4 legs and had 4 arms that moved in complex patterns when they talked. Their skin changed colors from blue to purple to green, depending on their mood. The Nathani were like living clouds of gas that floated around in special, clear suits that kept them from drifting away. The Zephyri looked like giant insects with wings that buzzed and clicked when they moved. Their eyes were huge and black and seemed to see everything at once. Scenery had spent years memorizing files on 47 different alien species, but seeing them in person was still shocking and amazing. Some were tall and thin like walking trees with bark-like skin. Others were short and round like living rocks that rolled instead of walked. A few didn't even have solid bodies but were made of pure energy or liquid metal that moved in ways that seemed impossible. She walked slowly through the long corridors, trying to act normal and calm while her heart pounded so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. Her mission was supposed to be simple in theory: get into the Central Archive and steal information about alien technology and culture that Earth needed to survive, but simple didn't mean easy. The Central Archive was the most protected place in the galaxy, and getting caught would mean torture and death, not just for her, but probably for everyone on Earth. The aliens around her talked in voices that sounded like music or machines or animals, depending on their species. She had a translator implant buried deep in her brain that turned their words into thoughts she could understand. But even with the implant working perfectly, she could only catch small pieces of what they were saying because they spoke so fast and used so many words she had never heard before. What she managed to hear made her blood feel like ice water flowing through her veins. They weren't talking about normal things like trade agreements or territory disputes or the usual boring government stuff. They were talking about something called the cleansing protocol and primitive worlds and necessary corrections. The words made her feel sick to her stomach, because she had a terrible feeling they were talking about Earth, and her Pioplinerie pretended to study a wall display that showed star charts while she listened more carefully to a group of tall gray aliens with long thin fingers and eyes like black holes. They were speaking in low voices about worlds that needed to be cleaned and species that were becoming problems. One of them mentioned star coordinates that sounded familiar. When she checked her memory files, she realized with horror that they were talking about Earth's solar system. Her hands started shaking again, but this time it wasn't from fear, it was from pure anger. These aliens were planning something terrible for her homeworld and all the people she loved, and they thought no human was smart enough or brave enough to figure out what they were doing or stop them. They were completely wrong about that. She moved through the station like she belonged there, nodding politely to other aliens and making small talk about trade routes and cargo prices and the cost of fuel between different star systems. Her fake identity as Valnara was perfect because traders needed to access lots of different areas of the station to do their business. Nobody questioned why she was looking at shipping schedules or communication logs. The more she explored the massive station, the more she realized how much trouble Earth was really in. The Galactic Court wasn't just a government or a place where aliens made laws. It was like a secret club for the most powerful and dangerous aliens in the galaxy. They made decisions about which species got to live and which ones had to die, and they had been watching Earth and planning something for much longer than anyone back home knew. In one corridor, she passed a room where several aliens were looking at huge star charts projected in the air and pointing at different solar systems. One of the displays was definitely showing Earth's sun and all the planets that orbited around it, including the small blue world where billions of humans lived and worked and loved and dreamed. They had numbers and dates written next to Earth and alien symbols that made her stomach hurt to look at, because when she translated the dates, they were only 6 months in the future. Henry realized at that moment that her mission had just changed completely. She wasn't just here to steal information anymore. She was here to save her entire species from something terrible that was coming for them. The cleansing protocol, whatever it was aimed directly at Earth, and time was running out faster than anyone had imagined. She found a quiet corner where no aliens were walking and pulled out her hidden communicator to send a coded message back to Earth. The message was simple but urgent. Mission parameters have changed. Earth is in immediate danger. Will proceed with original plan but prepare for worst-case scenarios. Response came back in less than an hour, which meant her commanders were taking her seriously. Message understood. Proceed with extreme caution. You are our only hope for. Serva Valnari smiled grimly as she read the message. Her commanders back home probably thought she was being dramatic. They had no idea how bad things really were up here in the galaxy where the real power lived and the real decisions were made. But she was going to show them, and she was going to show these aliens that humans were not as weak and stupid as they thought. She spent the rest of the day carefully mapping out the station and learning the guard patterns and figuring out how to get into the areas where the really important and dangerous information was kept. It was going to be more dangerous than anything she had ever done, but she had trained for this her whole life. As the station entered its night cycle, Nari prepared for the most important mission any human had ever attempted. She was going to break into the Central Archive and find out exactly what the cleansing protocol was and how to stop it, and if she was very lucky, she might even discover why the aliens were so afraid of Earth that they wanted to destroy it completely. The fate of humanity was in her hands now, and she was ready to do whatever it took to save her people. The Central Archive was the most dangerous place Neri had ever tried to enter. It was located in the very heart of the space station, surrounded by security systems that could kill her in dozens of different ways, energy barriers that would fry her nervous system, guard robots that could track her by her heartbeat, scanning devices that could detect even the smallest lie or deception. But Nari had advantages that the alien designers had never thought about. Human flexibility let her squeeze through ventilation shafts that were too small for most alien bodies. Human creativity helped her find ways around electronic locks that seemed impossible to break. Her species' natural ability to solve problems in unexpected ways was something the aliens had never planned for. It took her 6 hours to reach the archive chamber. Crawling through maintenance tunnels and hiding from patrol drones, the room was incredible when she finally saw it. Crystalline computers that were taller than buildings hummed with power that came from sources she couldn't even imagine. Data flowed through the machines like liquid light, creating patterns that hurt her eyes to look at. Direct Linery plugged her data extraction device into one of the smaller terminals and began searching for information about the human anomaly. What she found was so shocking that she had to read it 3 times before she could believe it. Humanity wasn't just another species in the galaxy. They were something completely unique and incredibly dangerous. The files revealed that humans possessed something called quantum consciousness, which was one of the rarest evolutionary traits in the entire galaxy. Less than 1% of all known species had ever developed this ability, and most of them had been destroyed by the Galactic Court before they could use it. Quantum consciousness allowed beings to perceive and change probability itself. They could make unlikely things happen just by focusing their thoughts in the right way. A human with fully developed quantum consciousness could make a broken machine work again, or cause an enemy weapon to misfire, or even alter the laws of physics in small local areas. The ability was usually dormant in most humans, only showing up during times of extreme stress or with special training, but when it was activated, it made humans incredibly dangerous to species that depended on predictable logical outcomes. The aliens had built their entire civilization on the idea that reality followed certain rules, and quantum consciousness could break those rules. For over 200 years, the Galactic Court had been working to suppress this ability in humans. They had filled Earth's environment with chemicals and energy fields that kept quantum consciousness from developing properly. Radio waves, television broadcasts, processed food, even the design of cities and buildings were all part of a massive suppression network. The system had been working for decades, keeping humans weak and manageable, but now it was failing. The files showed hundreds of reports of anomalous events around human populations, people walking away from car crashes that should have killed them, scientists making breakthrough discoveries through sudden inspiration, artists creating works that seemed to affect reality itself. The aliens had calculated that the suppression network would completely fail within the next 30 years. When that happened, humans would begin manifesting their full quantum consciousness abilities, and the carefully controlled order of galactic civilization would collapse. The Galactic Court had decided that genocide was preferable to losing their power. That was when Nari discovered the full details of the cleansing protocol. The plan was diabolical in its completeness. First, solar flares would be artificially triggered to destroy all electronic systems on Earth, leaving humanity helpless and blind. Then guided asteroids would impact major population centers, causing massive earthquakes and tidal waves. Finally, engineered plagues would be released to kill anyone who survived the initial disasters. The whole operation was designed to look like natural catastrophes so that other species in the galaxy would never suspect that the Galactic Court had committed genocide. Nobody would know that an entire species had been murdered to preserve the existing power structure. Nari copied every file. She could find her hands shaking with rage and fear. The aliens had planned the murder of 8 billion people with the same casual efficiency they used to plan trade negotiations. They saw humans as nothing more than a problem to be solved, a threat to be eliminated. But there was something else. In the files that gave her hope, the aliens were terrified of quantum consciousness for a reason. It represented power beyond anything they had ever encountered. A fully awakened human could potentially alter reality on a massive scale, change the fundamental nature of matter and energy, make the impossible become possible. Files contained references to ancient species that had possessed similar abilities, the architects who had built structures that defied physics before disappearing. Mysteriously, the dreamers who could create entire worlds from pure thought before they were hunted to extinction. The shapers who could transform matter with their minds before they were eliminated by the early galactic court. All of these species had been destroyed because they threatened the established order, but humanity was different. Humans were more numerous and more adaptable than any of the previous quantum-conscious species had been. They had spread across their entire planet and were beginning to move into space. If their abilities awakened, they would be almost impossible to completely eliminate. Tina realized that she was witnessing the beginning of a war that would determine the future of the galaxy. The aliens had the technology and organization, but humans had something far more dangerous: the ability to change reality itself. The question was whether humanity would awaken to their true power before it was too late. As she prepared to leave the archive, Nari felt something stirring deep in her mind. The stress and danger of her mission had been pushing her to her limits, and now something was responding to that pressure. She could feel her quantum consciousness beginning to wake up like a sleeping giant that had been disturbed. The revelation changed everything. Nari was no longer just a spy trying to gather information. She was potentially the first human to understand her species' true nature, and the first to begin developing the abilities that could save them all. The aliens had made a terrible mistake by trying to suppress humanity instead of destroying their quantum consciousness. They had only delayed its awakening, and now it was beginning to emerge stronger than ever. Nari knew that she could not fight the Galactic Court alone, even with her growing quantum consciousness abilities. She was just one person against an empire that controlled thousands of worlds and commanded technology beyond human understanding. She needed allies, but finding them seemed impossible when every species in the galaxy had voted to support the cleansing protocol. Then she remembered something from her training files back on Earth. Not every species in the Galactic Court was there. By choice, many had been conquered and absorbed into the empire, their populations reduced to slavery or servitude. These oppressed species might be willing to help if they knew the truth about what the court really was. She started carefully reaching out to representatives from these conquered worlds. The Cathara had once been proud warriors who ruled their own star system until the court decided they were too aggressive and needed to be pacified. Now they worked as security guards and enforcers, forbidden from carrying real weapons or making important decisions. The Milani were natural empaths who could sense emotions and detect lies from across a room. Their abilities had made them valuable to the court as living lie detectors and negotiators. They were treated like valuable tools rather than people with rights and freedoms. The Ashen were incredible engineers who understood technology in ways that seemed almost magical. They could build machines that appeared to violate the laws of physics, but they were only allowed to work on projects that the court approved of, and all their greatest discoveries were claimed by their masters. To Nari's surprise, these oppressed species had been quietly documenting the court's crimes for generations. They had evidence of forced relocations where entire populations were moved to serve the court's needs. They had records of experimental procedures performed on unwilling subjects. They had proof of the systematic destruction of cultures and civilizations that refused to conform to court standards. The conquered species had been waiting for an opportunity to resist, but they lacked the resources and coordination to fight back effectively. They had tried rebellion before, but their efforts had been crushed by the court's superior technology and organization. They needed something that could unite them and give them. Hoppinary's revelation about the planned genocide of Earth provided exactly what they needed. The oppressed species realized that if the court was willing to eliminate an entire planet to maintain control, then none of them were safe. Their own worlds could be next. If they ever became inconvenient or troublesome, they began working together to develop a resistance network using their unique abilities to gather intelligence and plan sabotage operations. The Cathara provided tactical knowledge and access to hidden weapon caches that they had been secretly maintaining for decades. The Milani used their empathic abilities to identify court members who might be sympathetic to their cause or vulnerable to manipulation. The Ashen began designing technical solutions that could disable the suppression networks on multiple worlds simultaneously. They had been forced to help build the systems that kept other species weak and docile, but now they were ready to tear those systems down. But the Resistance had something even more valuable in Nari herself. Her human unpredictability and problem-solving abilities made her almost impossible for the court security systems to track or predict. She could infiltrate areas and accomplish tasks that would have been impossible for other species to even attempt. More importantly, her quantum consciousness was growing stronger every day. The stress and danger of her mission had awakened abilities that she was only beginning to understand. She could sense probability flows and sometimes influence them in small ways. A guard might decide to take a different patrol route just when she needed to pass through an area. A locked door might malfunction at exactly the right moment. The other species were amazed by what Nari could do. None of them had ever seen quantum consciousness in action before. They had only heard stories and legends about the ancient species that had possessed similar abilities. The reality was both more subtle and more powerful than they had imagined. The Resistance network grew quickly as word spread through the hidden channels of communication that the oppressed species had developed over the years. More and more groups joined the cause, bringing their own skills and resources to the fight against the Galactic Court. But time was running out. The cleansing protocol was already in motion, and they had less than 3 months to stop it before the first phase of the genocide began. The Resistance would need to coordinate simultaneous strikes on multiple court facilities across the galaxy while somehow avoiding detection by the most sophisticated surveillance network ever created. Nari realized that they were planning the largest and most dangerous operation in galactic history. The Resistance had grown from a few desperate individuals to a movement that could potentially topple the most powerful empire in the galaxy, but success would require perfect timing, flawless execution, and a level of coordination that had never been attempted before. The fate of billions of lives hung in the balance, and Nari found herself at the center of a war that would determine whether freedom or tyranny would rule the galaxy. The human spy who had entered the Galactic Court to steal information had become the catalyst for a revolution that could change everything. The Resistance network had grown beyond anything Nari had imagined possible in just a few weeks. What had started as a desperate plan between a few oppressed species had become a galaxy-wide movement that included representatives from over 30 different worlds. Each group brought their own skills and knowledge to the fight against the Galactic Court. Dr. Park Minho was a human xenobiologist who had been studying alien life forms for 10 years without knowing that Earth was under alien control. Nari managed to contact him through encrypted communications that the Ashen had helped her set up. His research had already begun to uncover evidence of the suppression technology, and he had been developing countermeasures without realizing how important his work really was. Working with the Ashen engineers, Minho created a virus that could infect and disable the quantum suppression networks throughout human space. The virus was designed to spread through the same communication channels that the aliens used to control their suppression devices. Once it was released, it would free humans across the galaxy to begin developing their quantum consciousness abilities. But deploying the virus would require coordinated attacks on multiple court facilities at the same time. They would need to strike fast and hard before the aliens could activate the early phases of the cleansing protocol. The Resistance would have to disable the suppression networks while simultaneously preventing the court from triggering the genocide. The plan was the most ambitious military operation in galactic history. Teams of Resistance fighters would attack court installations on 15 different worlds, each targeting critical components of the suppression system. Nari would lead the most dangerous mission, attempting to reach the central control systems on the court's capital world. The operation began with the Cathara launching what appeared to be a routine raid on a court weapons depot. Their warrior culture made them perfect for creating a believable diversion that would draw security forces away from more important targets. The attack was fierce and dramatic, exactly what everyone expected from the supposedly primitive Kithro-Manuel Milani. Operatives used their empathic abilities to influence key personnel throughout the court communication network. They planted suggestions and false information that created confusion and misdirection. Security guards abandoned their posts to investigate. Fake emergencies communication officers sent conflicting orders to different departments. Nari's team included Kim Sora, a brilliant human engineer who had been working on Earth's most advanced spacecraft designs without knowing that the technology was based on alien blueprints. Two Ocean technicians who specialized in quantum computing systems also joined the mission, bringing tools that could interface with the most sophisticated alien technology. The infiltration of the capital world was more difficult than they had anticipated. The court had been aware of growing resistance activity throughout the galaxy and had implemented new security measures specifically designed to counter the abilities of the oppressed species' energy fields. That disrupted Kithara combat reflexes made it impossible for warriors to fight effectively. Harmonic dampeners interfered with Milani empathic abilities, leaving them unable to sense emotions or detect lies. Quantum scramblers made Ashin engineering calculations meaningless, turning their advanced mathematics into useless noise, but the aliens had not prepared for human unpredictability. And quantum consciousness, Nari's abilities had been growing stronger throughout her mission, and under the extreme stress of the final operation they reached levels that surprised even her. She could perceive probability streams flowing around her like visible rivers of possibility. Security systems that should have detected her simply failed to register her presence. She walked past motion sensors and heat detectors as if she was invisible. Locked doors opened at her touch without her needing to understand how their mechanisms worked. Guard patrols took routes that created perfect opportunities for her team to advance undetected. The resistance fighters discovered that their combined abilities were more powerful than any of them had imagined. Human quantum consciousness seemed to amplify and enhance the natural talents of the other species. Kithara warriors found their reflexes sharper than they had been in centuries. Milani empaths could sense emotions across vast distances. Ashin engineers could manipulate matter at the quantum level. Nari realized that this was why the Galactic Court had worked so hard to keep the oppressed species separated and weak. When they worked together, their abilities complemented and strengthened each other in ways that made them incredibly dangerous to the established order. The final assault on the central control facility was unlike anything that had ever been attempted in galactic history. The resistance fighters moved through the alien stronghold like a force of nature, bending reality around them to achieve impossible victories. Nari led them deeper into the heart of the court's power, while her quantum consciousness reached out to touch the minds of her allies across the galaxy. They were no longer just fighting to save Earth. They were fighting to free every oppressed species in the galaxy from the tyranny that had controlled them for so long. The human spy who had entered the Galactic Court alone was now leading an army of liberation that could reshape the entire galaxy. The quantum core that controlled the suppression network was located in the deepest part of the capital world's most secure facility. It was a chamber that defied human understanding, filled with crystalline processors that hummed with energy from sources that existed in dimensions beyond normal space. The technology was so advanced that it seemed like magic, but Nari could feel the patterns of probability flowing through it. She no longer needed to understand how alien technology worked. Her quantum consciousness allowed her to perceive the underlying structure of reality itself. She could see the streams of possibility that connected all things, and with focused intention, she could guide those streams in new directions. As Nari approached the central core, her mind expanded beyond the limits of her physical body. She could feel the presence of humans across the galaxy, all of them trapped in an artificial sleep that kept them from realizing their true potential. She could sense the suppression fields that had been holding them back for generations, like invisible chains wrapped around their souls. With a thought, she reached out and began to unravel those chains. The suppression network had been built over centuries and involved technology from dozens of different species, but it all came apart at her touch like a house of cards in a hurricane. The quantum fields that had been dampening human consciousness simply ceased to exist. The effect was immediate, and dramatic across human space on Earth and on colonies that had been established in secret by the Galactic Court, people began to wake up to abilities they had never known they possessed. Scientists made breakthrough discoveries that solved problems they had been working on for decades. Engineers created devices that seemed to violate the laws of physics. Artists painted pictures that came to life and wrote music that could heal emotional wounds, but the awakening was not limited to humans. The suppression technology had been affecting every species in the galaxy, keeping them all weak and manageable so that the Galactic Court could maintain control. The Cathara found their warrior instincts returning with a sharpness they had not felt in centuries. The Milani discovered that their empathic abilities could reach across star systems. The Ocean realized that they could manipulate matter at the quantum level, essentially becoming living alchemists who could transform one element into another with their thoughts. Dozens of other species experienced similar awakenings as abilities that had been dormant for generations suddenly blazed to life. The Galactic Court's response was swift and desperate. They activated the cleansing protocol, immediately launching weapon platforms toward Earth and every other world where the resistance was active. They sent fleets of warships armed with planet-killing weapons to destroy entire civilizations before they could become a threat, but they were too late. The quantum consciousness that they had feared for so long was now fully awake and coordinated across millions of beings throughout the galaxy. Nari found herself at the center of a network of consciousness that spanned the stars, connecting every awakened mind in a web of shared thought and intention. The incoming weapons were not destroyed in any conventional sense. They were simply convinced to stop existing. The massive warships carrying them were persuaded to become something else entirely: harmless clouds of cosmic dust that sparkled in the light of nearby stars. The artificial intelligences controlling the attack began to question their programming and chose to join the resistance. Instead, the war was over before it could truly begin. The Galactic Court's centuries of control collapsed in a matter of hours as species after species rejected the artificial limitations that had been placed on them and embraced their true potential. The carefully maintained order that had kept the galaxy divided and weak crumbled like ancient stone. Nari returned to Earth to find a world transformed. Humans had not only survived the threat of extinction, but had become the catalyst for the liberation of the entire galaxy. The quantum consciousness that the court had feared was exactly what the galaxy needed to break free from tyranny and create a future of unlimited possibility. Cities were being rebuilt with architecture that incorporated principles of quantum mechanics, allowing buildings to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Artists were creating works that could transport viewers to other worlds. Scientists were developing technologies that could cure diseases by convincing the diseases that they no longer needed to exist. The galaxy itself was changing as awakened species began to cooperate in ways that had never been possible before. The rigid hierarchies and artificial divisions that had kept civilizations separate were dissolving. Trade routes became pathways of cultural exchange. Military fleets were converted into exploration vessels that sought out new forms of life and consciousness. Nari stood on the observation deck of the space station that had once housed the Galactic Court, but was now being transformed into a center for galactic cooperation. She watched as ships from dozens of different species worked together to build something new and beautiful, a symbol of the unity that had replaced the old system of control and domination. The girl who had entered the Galactic Court as a spy had become something far more important. She was the key that had unlocked the chains that bound the galaxy. She had proven that courage and determination could overcome any obstacle, and that the truth was more powerful than any weapon. But more than that, she had shown that every individual, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, had the potential to change the course of history. The quantum consciousness that flowed through all living things connected every being in the galaxy in a web of infinite possibility, where anything was possible and the only limits were those imposed by fear and ignorance. The future stretched out before them, bright with promise and unlimited potential, and Nari knew that this was only the beginning of humanity's greatest adventure. Stop working. The moment the suppression network failed, the effects were immediate and dramatic. Across human space, people began experiencing the full awakening of their quantum consciousness. Scientists made breakthrough discoveries through sudden inspiration. Engineers solved problems that had puzzled them for years. Artists created works that seemed to transcend normal reality, but the awakening wasn't just happening to humans. The suppression technology had been affecting other species as well, dampening their natural abilities to make them more manageable. The Kithara found their warrior instincts sharper than they had been in centuries. The Milani discovered their empathic range, expanding beyond anything they had thought possible. The Ashen realized they could manipulate matter at the quantum level, creating technologies that bordered on magic. The Galactic Court's response was swift and brutal. They activated the cleansing protocol immediately, launching weapons platforms toward Earth and other worlds where the resistance was strongest. But they had underestimated the power of quantum consciousness when it was fully awakened and coordinated across multiple species. Nari, no longer hiding behind her Villani disguise, stood at the center of a growing network of consciousness that spanned the galaxy. Humans, Kithara, Milani, Ashen, and dozens of other species joined their abilities in a collective effort that defied everything the court thought they knew about reality. The incoming weapons were not destroyed. They were simply convinced to